Happy Friday. It's Friday, June 5th, 2020. We are a full week into the month of June. Today's daily Bible readings are Psalm 8, Job 38, 12 through 21, and then 2 Timothy 1, 12 through 14, which is actually the continuation of yesterday's epistle from which was also from 2 Timothy, which was 8 through 12. So kind of going to be looking at that whole section, not in great depth, but just to point something out. So anyway, this story is about Paul's abandonment, people abandoning Paul. So Paul had been imprisoned for preaching the gospel, proclaiming the gospel, and as a result, if you read this whole first chapter of 2 Timothy, you see that he talks about how people in the church had abandoned him because they were ashamed of his imprisonment. And Paul talks about this. He talks about his suffering as a prisoner, and he says that, he suffers, but he's not ashamed of it. And he says, and for this reason I suffer as I do, but I am not ashamed. Paul, understood the consequences, that if he was going to preach the gospel, even though people didn't want him to preach the gospel and they threatened him with all sorts of things, he knew that if he persisted in that there would be a price. And like I said, during that imprisonment, people in the church, who he actually names, abandoned him because they were embarrassed by it. They thought it was unseemly. They didn't think it reflected well. But Paul's resolute in his commitment to the truth and his commitment to the gospel. He's not so worried about what other people think that he refuses to do what he knows that God has called him to do. And he even says that here. He says, but I am not ashamed, right? And then he goes on and he says, for I know the one in whom I have put my trust, and I am sure that he is able to guard until that day what I have entrusted to him. So Paul knows that when he chose to answer Christ's call to proclaim his gospel and to serve his church, he knew that was going to be that was a commitment, that he was entrusting his life to God if he was going to follow down that road. And he wasn't putting his faith so much in the church or the people of the church as he was putting his faith in God and in Christ, and was sure that no matter what happened to him, no matter what sufferings, what embarrassments, what imprisonment might come, that God was trustworthy and that he was able to guard him for good or for bad in all those situations, for that goal and against that day, the day of that fulfillment of his call, the day of Christ's return. He was probably looking forward to as well. And that's an important thing for us to remember, that doing the right thing, persistently proclaiming the gospel of Christ, answering your call, living out your call that God has put on your life, for the sake of Christ and for the sake of righteousness, it can still have consequences. We live in a world that doesn't like to be reminded that it is broken and sinful, however else you may want to talk about it. And standing up for that and standing against that can have consequences. But like Paul, you have to ask yourself, who are you going to put your trust in? If you're worried about people being embarrassed because you stand up for the truth, you may not be standing up for the truth that Christ has called you to. So, like Paul, put your trust in God. We will be back on Monday with more daily Bible readings. Go out, have a good weekend, and enjoy the summer weather. See you later. Boop.